Hello and welcome to the Pinwheels pregame show. My name's Mitchell Kaminsky. Big week coming up. Trade deadline fast approaching. A little less than a week now until that trade deadline. So White Sox going to be one of the most active teams during that trade deadline. Last night, we may have seen Garrett Crochet throw his last pitch in a White Sox uniform. So let's get into it. As always, this episode sponsored by Homage. You see that QR code? That QR code top of your screen. You scan that, you can get yourself a shirt. Plenty of options to choose from. So let's start with Garrett Crochet. It's no secret I really like Garrett Crochet. If you've been listening to the show the last couple of weeks, he's kind of carried it because he's one of the only players worth a damn on this team to talk about. So he pitched last night, went 4 innings, gave up 2 runs. Not one of his better starts, but the White Sox, you can tell, erring on the side of caution. Right before the break, they only let him to throw 2 innings. They wanted him to give him that chance to pitch in the All-Star game. They've had that pitch limit on. And he was talking to reporters after the game, and it was a shame because they were asking him if he was rust or anything. And he really, even despite giving up the 2 runs, and he did walk 2 guys early, the command was not as sharp as you'd usually see it. But even then, in 4 innings, he still struck out 7 guys. So the stuff still plays. And I think it was just tough for him because he had that pitch limit predetermined heading into that game. So he had to be really economical, as he put it, in his post game afterwards. And you could tell he was a little bit frustrated, but he kind of took the high road there. Now, it's interesting. The reason the Sox did that, I think it's a foregone conclusion. He's going to be traded, most likely. I mean, that's why they got this pitch limit on him. And I get they're trying to be cautious with him, but I think even more so now because they don't want him to get hurt right before the trade deadline. But honestly, the way they've handled him, and I kind of get it, if you're handling him long term, but it could almost, in a strange way, if you're an opposing team, you might be a little bit concerned because the guy's coming off of surgery. You see how cautious the White Sox are being. So another team could use that against him. Now, Chris Getz, he sets a high price. He did this with Dylan Cease, and from everything that I have heard, the way he goes about negotiating, he doesn't really pit teams against each other or anything. He sets his asking price. You either meet it or you don't, but he's not moving off of it. But if I'm an opposing team, you could use that against them, just the way they've handled Garrett Crochet and being like, look, I'm not going to give up all of that for a guy that's only started half a season and you have him on a pitch limit. If I need him to pitch in the playoffs, I might have to use him out of the bullpen. How do I know he can go deep into games in the postseason in October? So another team could use that against them. Obviously, he's the most valuable pitching commodity you have on the market right now. Top of the leaderboard in the AL, near the top of the leaderboard in the AL in strikeouts. He's just been phenomenal. I mean, he had a great showing in the All-Star game as well. There was a report that came out too that the Dodgers were interested in a mega deal for Kopech, Robert, and Crochet all in one. I don't think that happens at all. The Dodgers are a smart organization. Are they going to gut their entire farm system for that? No, good teams usually don't do that. But I think it's going to be interesting to see because you're going to get a pretty good return for Crochet. But the interesting thing with him is because the asking price is going to be so high, there's only going to be a couple teams that can really be in on him that have the resources that Getz is looking for to make a deal like that. So I actually think, despite being the better pitcher of the two, Eric Fetty's going to have the bigger market. I think he's going to be more demand because he's only getting paid $7 million. Like Crochet, he's also under team control, and he's been very, very good this year as well. Headed into the All-Star break with a 2.99 ERA. He had another great start in Texas the other night. And so that's one that, too, a mid-market team that doesn't have a deep farm system like the Dodgers necessarily can afford. I could really see St. Louis, I think, would be a good trade partner. The Brewers, excellent trade partner. Phillies don't really need more pitching. They're already pretty stacked, but I can also see them swinging in. Not that they're a mid-market team, but if I'm the Phillies, you already have all the pitching you need. But if you want to add even more depth, then Crochet would be a great guy, or excuse me, Fetty would be a great guy to add where you don't have to clean out your farm system. So I actually think between the two, Fetty's going to be the more desirable one. Now, Robert, I think that's a 50-50 proposition, whether the White Sox trade him or not. That's just going to be another, again, high asking price. I think if it was up to Getz, he does trade him. Just because I think they've made it clear, looking at this pitching staff, because you look at the pitching staff right now, the thing that Jerry Reinsdorf said when he fired Rick Hahn, fired Kenny Williams, we picked Getz because we want this thing to turn around quickly. We owe it to the fans. Well, that's turned out to be bullshit. And I think Getz, they've kind of chosen, and I'm sure they've had talks with Jerry, the best route to go is kind of tear this thing down to the studs and start over. So I think you've already seen them trading off all these pieces. And really, if you look at it right now, since the 2021, since they've won the division title in 2021, the only players remain, assuming that they do trade Crochet and then maybe if they trade Robert, the only guys left from that 2021 team will be Andrew Vaughn, Gavin Sheets, Danny Mendick, if you count him, but he's down in the minor leagues. And then I believe it would be is also you'd have to trade Kopech there too. And then Jimmy Lambert would be about it. So I think he's kind of made his bet by trading away Cease and all these guys. They're signaling we're tearing this thing down to the studs. So I think Robert, I think they're going to try and trade, but it's going to be like a 50-50 proposition if someone can meet that asking price. Tommy Pham actually was on Foul Territory, and he had some really nice things to say about Luis Robert, because it's been a tough season, but he was talking about like just how good of a routine this guy has and how dedicated he is. So that was encouraging to hear. But if you're going to be tearing it down this way and you're looking at the timeline of a lot of the prospects they do have, it's probably going to take until beyond 2027, which is probably one of the reasons they're going to trade Crochet to really get this thing kicked into gear. Robert's contract is up after 2027. So that does not necessarily fit the timeline. So I think Getz is going to be tearing this thing down. The other reason I think that too, especially going off of Reinsdorf's comments were, hey, I want a quick turnaround. If you look at the rotation they have right now, it sounds crazy given how crappy the record is, but that rotation is good enough to win a division. But it is. I mean, with the way Crochet's pitched, the way Svetty's pitched, the way Drew Thorpe's pitched, he's doing stuff that White Sox starters haven't done yet in the rookie season. His first 9 starts have been phenomenal. But he's had one bad start really between the two, but he has been awesome. And now they did kind of stumble into this, but that's rotation is good enough to win the division. The problem is that offense is so abysmal. Like I saw a stat the other day that their average runs per game, it's going to be the worst. They're on track to have the lowest scoring offense, counting average runs per games. I think it was like under, it's like 3.5 or something like that. It might have been even slightly under 3. I'd have to look up the exact number of runs. But it was the lowest since 1914 in the dead ball era, which is insane considering how lively the baseballs have been, home run. I mean, are hit more frequently. They just got no plate discipline. So that's the other reason I think they're probably going to try and trade Robert too, just because, if they wanted to do that quick turnaround, as Reinsdorf suggested when he fired Rick Hahn, they could do it. The pieces are there where you just have to get a bunch of bats free agency, but we all know he doesn't like to spend. So that's why I think he's going down this route. Now, the pressure is really going to be on Chris Getz. It's only his first trade deadline as general manager. And I think the early returns have been positive. I think he did very, very well on that Cease deal. He was looking for an elite arm in return. He got one in Drew Thorpe. And Samuel Zavala, the jury's still out on him. But I think, 19-year-old bat that looked really promising. I thought that was like one of the key pieces looking at that deal initially. I was like, this guy is going to be one of the more important pieces here. Drew Thorpe's going to be good. But, the ceiling a lot of people thought was going to be, a 2-3 starter, maybe like a Lucas Giolito type. And he's been a lot better than advertised. Even if you look at his numbers in Double-A, he was tearing it up. So Chris Getz in his first trade as the White Sox GM, very solid return. And I like the approach where this is my asking price. You meet it. I'm not budging off of it. So I do like that. So I'm cautiously optimistic how he's going to handle this. But if he butchers this trade deadline with all these assets that they have now, it's going to be hard to recover. This is a very, very important trade deadline for the White Sox, especially if you're trying to get that new core for your contention window. You cannot miss on these trades. You can't. Because then we're going to be going through this whole thing once again. And they don't have a ton of bats right now, especially after drafting Hagen Smith. They passed on Jack Caglione, which I kind of understand that move too. But, it's still a roll of the dice. College bats are one of the more known commodities you're going to get. They're one of the safer investments you can make as GM usually, as far as you're trying to get some offensive pieces in. Although it didn't really work with Andrew Vaughn. There's obviously still some risks involved. But pressure is on Getz to get this right. Because if he doesn't, this rebuild process is going to take a lot longer. And I would also just caution people, even though the farm system does look pretty good right now, especially on the pitching side. Now they do need to restock the bats. The offense isn't really there. Just be careful about putting, I'm not really as invested. And that's why I haven't really gone through all these other farm systems with like a wish list of people, because prospects saw this first rebuild, we were burned by it. How good we thought they're all going to be, and how Robert and which he's panned out, but Jimenez and, Kopech and all these guys are going to be surefire things. And, we saw after 2021 really didn't work out that way. So that's the other thing to too. There's still a lot of risk involved. There's no guarantee this thing is going to work out. Now, one of our White Sox writers at Sports Mockery, Craig Rowland, check out his article. He did a full-blown trade deadline preview. I'm going to go through some of these that he had on there and kind of share my thoughts because he did a really good dive into like who he thinks that the White Sox are going to, or teams that would be a good fit and who he thinks they could get in return. Another really good article is when the Fetty, so it was announced that the Cardinals were in on Eric Fetty, Shy Sox fan Mike. Most of you probably know him on Twitter. He had a really good article breaking down some potential trade packages for him. So before we get into some of these other trades, actually, there was one thought that he brought up that I thought was very interesting. I kind of want to go into this a little bit too. So his suggestion for like one of them was like a possible trade. He was talking, we have like a little White Sox chat there. We throw ideas out. And he was saying, I think it'd be interesting trading Fetty for Jordan Walker straight up. That is kind of interesting because the White Sox do need outfielders. Dominic Fletcher, unfortunately, it looks like White Sox have kind of sold their stock on him. We'll see after the trade deadline. I would assume he would get called back up, but the early, and it's hard to judge a player after one season, but doesn't look all that great. Doesn't look like necessarily he's going to be the long-term solution in right field. The White Sox had initially thought when they traded for him. Jordan Walker, highly touted prospect when he came to the big leagues, and he struggled a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting. At first, I was like, yeah, I would make that trade. Looking into that a little bit more, though, and I'm curious if anyone listening here, if they want to chime in on the chat. I think, given the White Sox history of developing bats, I don't know if that would work out all that well. Because part of his issue in St. Louis was they kind of ruined his development as a hitter. They kind of messed with his launch angle a little bit, and he started pounding the ball into the ground. He wasn't getting it in the air anymore. So that was like, what I have no confidence the White Sox can take a lot of these bats. And that's the other problem with trading for these prospects too, is because the White Sox don't have a great history of developing hitters recently. Like a lot of the guys were like surefire, can't admit, like the bats that have panned out, like Jose Abreu in recent memory when they got him. Well, he was already a bona fide star in Cuba. Luis Robert was like a 5-tool, like that a lot of people consider like a can't miss guy. A lot of these other prospects, like Eloy Jimenez, he was highly touted with the Cubs. He hasn't looked all that good. The plate discipline's horrible all around. You look at the last 4 years, they're always in the bottom of the league in walks. So it's kind of, that's the other risk when you're trading for these guys. Even if they are a good prospect on paper, like the White Sox don't have a very good history of developing bats. We got Southside Deech in the chat. How we doing, Southside Deech? Where are the bats coming from? In the last 5 to 10 years, name one bat they've actually developed into a major league hitter. I don't care if we get prospect bats, if the White Sox will be developing. Absolutely. Totally agree. I totally agree with that point. That's a risky run. They haven't shown a history of developing bats. And I think that's why they went with Hagen Smith, because it's like a safer route for them, because they've shown an ability to develop left-handed pitchers. They haven't shown an ability to develop many bats. We got Ryan Tobert in the chat. He says, do you think Robert could have a bigger market than just contenders? Teams who wanted to contend but faltered, like the Cubs, who may jump in line. So maybe because he's under control, but I think Getz is going to be asking for a haul for him. So these non-contenders, if you have a deep farm system, you're usually banking on a lot of those prospects to kind of build things up. So I don't see a non-contender like trading away the farm for a guy that they could have till 2027, but now a lot of the prospects you're trying to build around don't really pan out. So it's possible. And the contract's like kind of affordable for the star players, but there are some injury risks there. So I think it would only be contenders realistically wanting to trade for a Luis Robert. But that's, I think, out of all the players the Sox have, Fetty, I think, is going to have the biggest market. So we'll look at some of the guys that they have right now. We'll start with Garrett Crochet. I think the Dodgers probably make the most sense for him. The Dodgers have a good farm system. They have the assets to trade for a guy like Crochet. And they also have, because they have a lot of these prospects, they have a lot of guys that are blocking these prospects. That's why we saw the Cubs get a great deal with Michael Busch. Michael Busch is a stud, but he had nowhere to go in that Dodgers lineup. The Dodgers starting pitching. Now you're going to get Clayton Kershaw back. There's a lot of uncertainties there for a team that's contending. They do need another starter. I think they're going to go all in on Crochet. So that's where I have Crochet ending up. Now I'm not going to make any predictions as far as prospects, but one of the prospects that stood out that I think would be interesting in a trade package, I really like this catcher, Diego Carta. He's the Dodgers' 7th ranked prospect right now. And I know we got Caro in the minors and we got Corey Lee that's looked pretty good, but Corey Lee offense has regressed a little bit. He's looking more like a backup as of now. Caro, I think offensively, he still looks very solid. He's hitting about 275 in the minors right now. I think he has 12 home runs. I might have to double check on that. the defense has not come along as much as they thought. And there's been some mobility concerns behind the plate. So I would not be opposed to bringing in another catcher just because you don't know if either of those guys are going to pan out. In Baseball America, they've had their prospect rank. And now, you take the prospect rank as a grain of salt. Carroll's slowly been kind of fading in those top 100 ratings recently. So I wouldn't be opposed. I think that's an interesting prospect they have. And because the Dodgers already got a pretty good Will Smith is playing well. He's going to be blocking that guy. They got no room for him. So I can see that as a guy that would be included in a deal for Crochet. The Dodgers where I got them. For Eric Fetty, the Cardinals have been with the big one floated around. I actually really think the Brewers were the perfect team for him. They're in line to win that division. Mid-market team. No, it's just going to be a matter I don't think it's going to take a ton of prospects to get him, but you trade a couple top 10 prospects in your organization. I think you can get a guy like Fetty. He's right in their price range. So I could see I think it's going to be an NL Central team. I think it's Cardinals or the Brewers. I got Fetty going to the Brewers. The Cardinals do have a little bit more interesting prospects I could see as well. Chris Flexen, that's an interesting one. I don't know how big the market would be for a guy like that. Craig, he predicted, and I encourage you to go read his article. He's doing a much better breakdown of this than I did. He had him going to Arizona, and for their 12th ranked prospect, outfielder Jorge Barrosa. So I actually think that could be an interesting little trade for the White Sox. They do need some more bats, and Flexen was kind of a buy low throwaway. So you're willing to roll a dice with a guy like him. Kopech is interesting too. Because I think there's a lot of big market teams that would like to add a Kopech to their bullpen, but there is some concerns there just because, can he handle a high leverage situation in a bigger market? Now, I know Chicago is a big market, but on a contending team. I think the Yankees would be a good landing spot for Kopech, but there's going to be a lot more pressure there. And Kopech, he's kind of had, some confidence issues in the past, even this season. So that would be interesting to see how he could handle. Now, I do think throwing that immaculate inning at the time that he did was very good for his stock. Kind of reminded everyone, hey, I'm still pretty good. And you got a lot of scouts watching at the time. But I got him going to the Yankees. But that one's going to be tougher to get a huge haul. I think they would almost be better off packaging him with another player. Maybe even like a team like the Phillies, you package him with Fetty. You could get a pretty decent bat. Now, I think Tommy Pham, I think he goes to the NL. I think he goes to the Braves. Braves kind of like those, or Arizona. Arizona could bring back Pham too. I think they really like him in Arizona. But I could see him go to the Braves. I could also see him going to the. I think the Braves would make a lot of sense for Pham. DeYoung could also go to the Braves. They do need another an infielder, and they kind of do like at the deadline taking flyers on those mid-level guys. So I think those would be two that would really make a lot of sense for them. Brebbia, I don't feel like has much of a market. I know his name's been floated around a little bit. I saw him pitch against Texas there, blow that save, and that was kind of tough. I mean, Ryan Tobert in the chat says it feels like Kopech and Fetty are destined to go together, and I kind of agree because there's some risk involved with Kopech. But if you're the White Sox and trying to maximize what you can get for Fetty, he's going to be a big haul. I think that would make sense. But there are some concerns with Kopech more so than Fetty. But Fetty's going to have a big demand. And I think Getz can kind of leverage that to get a little bit of a better deal than they already do. Andrew Vaughn's name's been floated around. I'll be honest, I don't understand it. I don't see any team. And he's been hitting better. He got off to such a bad start. A lot of people like to shit on Andrew Vaughn. I think he's actually been a better hitter than people have given credit for because a lot of people have just stopped watching. But he's kind of started to heat up. He hasn't been elite by any means. He hasn't lived up to his first-round pick hype to this point, but he has been a respectable major league hitter kind of from early June to this point. I think he's been good, but I don't see any team realistically a contender. What contender is going to want Andrew Vaughn? I don't think he's pushing you over to the promised land by adding Vaughn. So that'll be interesting to see as well. Another thing I did want to talk about, Baseball America released their updated midseason prospect rankings. And this is why I'm a little bit careful prospect humping, or as Fids likes to put it, prospect soaking, so to speak. There's a lot of risk involved. Colson Montgomery, everyone thought was a surefire thing. He kind of tumbled in their rankings from last year. He started the season inside of the top 10. Last year, I believe he was 11th on their rankings. I'll pull this up. But this year, Montgomery, he went down to 38th in their rankings, which was kind of surprising. So he dropped 23 spots from last year. And he had a decent season last year, but there's some injury problems this year. Like the results just haven't been there. And he was never known as a power hitter when they drafted him. But he's slashing right now 217, 332, 387 with 105 strikeouts. And this, to Deech's point, is where it's a little bit of a concern because the White Sox don't have a good history of developing bats, especially in the plate discipline aspect. Like, if you're not going to be hitting for average, then you better be able to draw walks. And we've seen this with Brooks Baldwin, too. And I'm not going to shit on the guy because he's getting his first taste of Major League action, but a lot of strikeouts and his first, 20 so at bats. Been a common theme. Not a lot of walks, guys that strike out a lot. The plate discipline has to improve, and that's something you really can't work on once you're in the major leagues. Like, you kind of either have it or you don't. So Montgomery's been a little bit concerned. I'm not selling all my stock on Montgomery. I still think he's a stud, but I don't know if he's that surefire prospect everyone thinks, because his stock, especially in Baseball America, is usually on top of their stuff. But the fact that he's fallen 23 spots since this time last year, a little bit concerning. Now, he has hit 12 home runs, and he does, he had a history, and this is what it's also kind of interesting with him. When they drafted him, everyone was like, he's a very mature hitter. He draws a lot of walks, and he still is drawing a lot of walks. He has 45 walks on the season, which is pretty good. But the strikeout numbers pair with that, it's an interesting conundrum with him. And he was considered last year too to have the best strike zone discipline out of anyone in that White Sox organization. So, just be careful of putting all your eggs in the basket with these prospects. They're not all guaranteed to pan out. So Montgomery was listed at number 38 on their list. Next highest prospect, Hagen Smith. He's only been in the White Sox organization a couple weeks already. Baseball America has him as their second highest rated prospect. Now he's going to be, I have him kind of lined up as Crochet's replacement down the road. I think he'll be a star in the White Sox. That is the one thing they have shown they've been able to do well: develop left-handed pitching. You get him and Noah Schultz together in the same rotation, and that's going to be watch out. That's going to be good. And I mean, he set a lot of records this year, and he's also set another one because he just got a nearly $8 million signing bonus, which I believe they said it was the it was the highest signing bonus for a left-handed pitcher in MLB history. He signed for about just over $7 million there. So, I mean, it makes sense because he broke all those records in the SAC, 2.04 ERA in 84 innings, a 17.3 strikeouts per nine. So that's a bit encouraging. Next up on that list that Baseball America had, Noah Schultz. Noah Schultz, he's one that his stock also, common theme, left-handed pitcher, stock continuing to rise. He's been very good this year between high A and double A, 291 ERA down in the minors. And what's nice about him too, because he's so tall, his fastball is already good. It can hit 97, but with that extension, it appears even faster. That slider is filthy. So I think he's going to be a stud. Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz, that's a good 1-2 punch. And it's just kind of a gut punch thinking, boy, you could have those two plus Thorpe plus Crochet if you were willing to invest with him in him moving forward. That's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to watch Crochet deal on another team, especially when you see these guys in the minor leagues. Like, man, they could have a damn good rotation moving forward. Drew Thorpe was next. He's at number 51 on their top Baseball America's top 100 prospect rankings. Thorpe's a guy, too. He's not going to be on that list much longer because he's going to be losing his prospect status soon. But, man, he's been excellent. He has been as advertised. He's been better than I even thought, because Jim Callis of MLB.com, when they kind of were doing his profile when the White Sox first traded for him, a lot of it was lining up like, hey, this is kind of like his ceiling. He kind of figures to be a middle of the rotation starter. He'll give you some solid innings, but changeup has emerged as one of the best pitches in baseball, which is incredible considering he only throws in the low 90s, and his changeup's still fooling people. So I think that's going to be interesting to watch to see how hitters adjust to that once they get more tape. If you listen to the Royals talk about it, his last start, they're like, man, it was so tough. And he was like, he's very surgical about that. So if he's controlling that fastball, that changeup has already emerged one of the best pitches in baseball. And 11 starts in Double A this year. He had a 1.35 ERA. So he didn't even have to pitch in Triple A. He just bypassed that altogether. Opponents were only hitting 170 off of him. And that's kind of carried on in the MLB to this point. Opponent average, it's interesting so far. Now he's only 7 starts in. But as I mentioned, his opponent average in the minor leagues was 170. The majors right now, 162. So he's been very good. Finally, Edgar Quero is number 90 on their list. White Sox top catching prospect right now. He's kind of fallen in the rankings a little bit. Last year at this time, he was number 78. Now he's down at 90. He's still been producing pretty good results at the plate. He's got 12 home runs. He's hitting 275. And he just got promoted to AAA. That AAA lineup looking pretty good right now with Ramos and Kiro. And that's honestly, if you don't want to watch the Sox right now, the Charlotte Knights or Birmingham. Birmingham got a good playoff team going, but the White Sox decided to promote all those players. So I don't know if they're going to be making a run for the title down there. But the Charlotte Knights have a pretty interesting lineup with a lot of guys that could potentially be on the team in the future, with Montgomery, Caro, and Ramos. So that's kind of an interesting one to watch too. He's been pretty good. Like last year in 101 games, he drew 57 walks. So that's been encouraging. I think the biggest issue with him so far right now has been kind of his defense right there. So that's kind of the state of the White Sox farm system up to this point. There are some good pieces in there, but you notice the two red flags that have kind of popped up. Like, as if you go down the pitching there, Smith, a lot of confidence there. Schultz, a lot of confidence there. Thorpe, obviously, we've seen him. He's producing results at the major league level. The red flags have kind of been with a lot of their hitting prospects. So this is why it's going to be a huge deadline for Getz. Can you get these good bats? And then an even bigger question, can the White Sox develop them? Massive trade deadline. Going to be very interesting to watch, see how that all unfolds. And then after the trade deadline too, I think it's going to be kind of fun. You know, they're going to get worse by trading away a lot of these like known commodities. It's actually funny too. They MLB did a ranking of like the top players available at the trade deadline. The White Sox had 4 of the 9 starters there. So it's just kind of depressing too. If they have 4 of the 9 best available players at the deadline, and their record is 25-75. I also saw a stat that they've blown 27, or they have 27 wins. They've blown 25 saves this year, which is incredible when you kind of look at it. But you know, pressure's on Chris Getz because he messes this one up. It's going to be hard to dig themselves out of that hole again. Cubs are going to be another team that interesting to watch. They said that they might be selling now unless the team goes on a win streak. So that's another kind of interesting thing to monitor these next couple days. What happens with the Cubs? But that's perfect lead in to tonight's show with Aldo and Fids. They will talk all about the Cubs trade deadline. I'm sure they'll dabble in the White Sox too, but make sure you're tuning in 8 o'clock tonight, I believe. Follow us on Pinwheels and Ivy, at Pinwheels and Ivy on Twitter, or at Pinwheels Pod on Twitter. They'll have the updates of when that show is and everything. Thank you so much for listening. This time next week, we'll probably be talking about the returns the White Sox got. So that'll be good. Make sure you join us once again at noon every Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your week.